right, Dr. Rauser, if you can hear, just click in accept invite. It should allow you to come up.
Okay, how's that?
Perfect. Yep, you're coming through nice. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, I've never been on this platform before, so this is new to me.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's a little confusing. The user interface is kind of not that helpful, but but you got here and it was pretty quick and easy, so that works.
Yep.
All right, so yeah, actually this server belongs to TJump. I know you guys have spoken in the past, but we just wanted to go over like fallibilism with you, as I had said in the email correspondence. Maybe if you want to give an introduction just to start out.
Yeah, sure. So my stipulation, as I said on email, is I'm not an expert on this area in epistemology or really any area. I focused on some epistemology during my doctorate 15 years ago, 20 years ago, but haven't written or focused much on it in the last 10 years. So I'm not up on the current conversation. I would not call myself an expert in it. So that's my proviso at the beginning. In terms of what fallibilism is, um, so I guess to set it up, there's a pretty deep intuition that a lot of people have, which is that in order to have knowledge about something, you have to have certainty in it, such that you could not be wrong in it. And one way that you find that intuition throughout history is with the development of various forms of skepticism that aim to raise some kind of objection to the reliability of our cognitive faculties in some area, such as in sense perception or in rational intuition. And if they can show that in that area, those faculties can go wrong, that we can misperceive something, that we can be delusional, then that undermines knowledge. And so that has been often a skeptical approach. And so one response to that has been the approach of those who have sought to defeat skepticism by reestablishing certainty and showing that, in fact, we can have certainty about particular areas of knowledge such that we could not be wrong. So one example of that that's quite famous is St. Augustine in about 400. He's writing against this group he called the academicians. They were like Pyrrhoian skeptics, like ancient Greek skeptics. And he sought to refute them by saying, well, if I can be wrong about something, then it follows that I exist. See, foul, or assume, as he put it. And that is something he said I could be certain of. And so from there, he sought to rebuild certainty. And then Descartes, just over a millennium later, famously kind of ripped off Augustine and tweaked it a little bit, said, I think, therefore I am. That was his attempt to defeat skepticism. So you have this conversation going back and forth between skeptics who say you can't have knowledge unless you're certain, and then you have people trying to defeat skepticism by showing that we can have certainty. And that sets it up for the fallibilist now to enter the conversation. And the fallibilist is somebody who says, well, in fact, you don't need to have certainty of that kind. You don't need to have incorrigibility for you to have knowledge or rational belief or justified belief. You can have it even if you have fallible, imperfect cognitive faculties. And so that's the position that I take.
Awesome. All right, I think that's a pretty good introduction. So yeah, I do have a few questions. I'm not sure exactly the right order to go through them in. I guess off the top, there's a way I've seen it expressed as more of like a thesis statement for fallibilism, that it has to do with justifications not guaranteeing the truth of a proposition. Um, Now, I don't know if that's something that's really particular to a sort of like JTB approach to knowledge, or if that's something that's broader and applies outside of that framework, or if yeah, I guess I also wanted to ask if JTB is sort of like uh, under the umbrella of fallibilism, or if fallibilism extends to other uh, definitions of knowledge.
I think those are two different topics. So JTB, of course, is this idea. And by the way, you probably, if you keep asking questions, you'll get pretty quickly to things I don't know. So again, just that proviso. But
Sure.
JTB is this shorthand for saying justified true belief, and that was accepted as the sort of standard definition of knowledge. So the way that that cashes out is that in order to have knowledge of something, you first of all have to have a belief. That belief has to be true, because you can't have knowledge of something if the thing you believe is false. It has to be true, but then something else has to obtain for that proposition to be knowledge, to make that status. And so justification is a way of labeling that. And the idea of justification is that you have some kind of good ground or warrant or reason for holding that belief. And so there's a famous critique of justified true belief um, by Edmund Gettier. He wrote a short paper in the early 1960s, 63, where he gives disconfirmations or defeaters to the argument that knowledge is exhausted in justified true belief, because he shows that you could have a true belief that is justified, and yet it does not meet the threshold of knowledge. And I'll just give one quick example. In fact, I think this example was given by Bertrand Russell. And although when I think about it, I think about the 1985 movie Back to the Future. So in Back to the Future, there's a clock that was hit by lightning in the town square, and so it's frozen and it hasn't moved anymore because it was hit by lightning. Now, if you came in, let's say that the clock says 11:37 p.m., and if you walk through the square at 11:37 p.m. and you look up and you see the clock there and you form the belief that it's 11:37, it's a true belief, it turns out, because it is in fact 11:37, and you're justified in believing it because you have no reason to doubt the clock is working and so on. But in fact, the clock is not working, and it turns out that you stumbled upon the truth, as it were, by chance. And so that was like a defeater, this idea that, well, then justification is not sufficient for knowledge. And so you have this development of either trying to add something to justification, or taking what is called an externalist approach to knowledge that says you don't even have to have access to justification in order to have knowledge or a rational belief. That conversation, I mean, again, I'm not an expert here, but to my mind, that conversation is a little different from the conversation of whether certainty is required, because you could conceivably be an externalist or JTB internalist about the nature of knowledge and still believe or not believe that certainty is required. So I think that they are distinct conversations, although they certainly may overlap in various contexts.
Understandable, yeah. Yeah, because I think they do sort of like the Gettier problem seems to get into some of the Pyrrhonian skepticism that you were talking about before that sort of like leads into fallibilism. And I've had people ask if the Gettier cases are related to fallibilism. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think you see that more as a problem with the definition of knowledge as maybe there's more to it, or do you think it just falls into needing a different theory of justification at that point?
I mean, the way I approach it is by distinction, and now I'm trying to get the gears going again. They're a little rusty. I think it's Roderick Chisholm, a well-known philosopher, who came up with a distinction between Methodism and particularism in epistemology, or theory of knowledge. And so the Methodist is an approach that says you begin with a sort of a priori stance, where you have some intuitive sense of what knowledge must be and what rationality must be, and you sort of stipulate. Then you go out and say, okay, and anything for it to be knowledge or rationality is going to have to meet this standard. And so then this um, approach of certainty, it begins by saying certainty is required, and so we're going to run everything through certainty, and if it can't be certain about it, then you can't have knowledge of it. And that's this a priori Methodist approach. And then the particularist is a different approach. The particularist doesn't begin with the sort of theoretical stance of, I'm going to begin by saying what knowledge is constituted by. Rather, the particularist says, I'm going to begin by looking at how people who seem to be rational to me and to navigate the world well, I'm going to look at how they normally form beliefs about the world and adopt a stance of innocent until proven guilty for the ways that they're forming beliefs. And so you go out and kind of do an empirical study, and what you see is people typically form beliefs through sense perceptual experience or through rational intuition and moral intuition, and then discursive reasoning out from those intuitive starting points, and from proprioception, or the perception of the movement and extension of your body in space, and aesthetic perception and all sorts of other things. And then they say, okay, that's how people usually form beliefs. So I'm going to assume that all those ways of forming beliefs are innocent until proven guilty, and that's the way a particularist builds toward knowledge. And it seems to me then that then a movement toward fallibilism is just an extension of the logic of this approach, because you say, hey, you don't have to have certainty generally in life. Like, we just navigate the world all the time, knowing that, I drove to my office tonight to do this interview, knowing that my car could break down, that I could get hit by a truck, but I went ahead and did it anyway. It seems like a reasonable stance. And so it just sort of seems like fallibilism now just comes along as one of the other deliverances of this particularist bottom-up approach to knowledge.
Interesting. Yeah, I've actually never heard of that before, but that's actually pretty. Do you think that that relates to like sort of coherentism and sort of like this like web of beliefs sort of approach in sort of like the foundations of epistemology at all, or
Well, coherentism can mean different things. So you could have coherentist theories of truth, coherentist theories of justification, or rationality. I don't think that coherentist theories of truth work. I I don't know what I am when it comes to truth, but I'm either a correspondence theory or maybe a deflationary theory of truth. I really don't know enough about it to say
Mhm.
whether the deflationary theory is satisfactory. But it does seem to me that, again, this sort of natural way of this. Let me say one more thing about this particularist approach: is it's really
Sure.
rooted in Scottish common sense realism and that sort of approach to doing philosophy, which was like Thomas Reid and people like that in the 18th century. And one thing that I found attractive about it is when I started out doing philosophy 25 years ago, 30 years ago, there's always an attraction to the really bold, counterintuitive theses. And some people continue on that all their lives. And so they argue things like, well, people don't exist. What are you talking about? People don't exist. Well, my philosophy tells me that people don't exist. And you get all these sort of very counterintuitive views, or there is no meaning in life, everything is meaningless, and or I'm the only mind that exists, right? All these kinds of very counterintuitive views. And what the common sense approach does is say, well, philosophy is maybe best served by beginning with and trying to vindicate our common sense. Now, common sense, of course, is a contentious term, but I still think that there's some value in the term, even when you recognize the contextualization and socio-historical limitations of it. So that's, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but that's sort of my
Oh no,
starting
that's
point
totally
there.
fine. Yeah, yeah, we like rambling, so because that was very interesting as well. And I guess so another question that I had that I guess is sort of related into what we've been talking about is like whether or not um we should just conceive of knowledge as being since fallibilism is sort of saying that it may be false, it may be true, and we don't really have sort of immediate access to that. And we may be calling claims knowledge when they aren't knowledge. That what we ought to focus on really is there reasoning behind the belief, or do you think that um, in the sense of like this common sense approach that like it's sort of just like seemings, like I've heard people talk about seemings, which doesn't seem to be like it doesn't seem to me that you're reasoning to something more so that it just appears to you that way.
I mean, the one thing I would say is we have to be careful about talking in terms of obligations, of rational obligations. Like the person who says, well, you always have to uh, follow out the track of your reasoning in order to be justified by anything, they quickly have taken on a very onerous task, because every moment we're forming an enormous number of beliefs. And if you are obligated to follow through and on the reasoning processes behind each one of those, then we're soon going to just collapse into skepticism, because we can't actually do that. In fact, so when you form a belief like it is sunny today, and you say, okay, I'm going to follow through. Why do I think it's sunny today? Well, you begin to look at the seemings, as you've called them. You're experiencing qualia, or sense perceptual experiences, and so then you kind of reason, well, usually when I experience sense perceptual experiences, then I usually think I have been. So then I probably have here. But then you have to ask additional questions, which is like, well, actually, I'm relying on my memory now. How reliable is my memory about past experience? And how many potential defeaters would there have to be for me to undermine the justification in this current inference based upon past experience. And you just go on, and pretty soon you just have this overwhelming burden of beliefs you have to justify just to get back to, yeah, it's sunny, or I'm feeling the warmth of the sun. And yet there's 1,000 other beliefs you're forming every minute as well. So I think one thing is it's just recognizing the limitations of human beings, um, that we simply can't kind of adopt what philosophers have sometimes called the God's eye point of view and rationally inspect everything apart from our location and the way the world seems to us. So yeah, we just have to begin with an innocent until proven guilty, which I think is the great attraction of externalism, which says that you don't have to justify all of your reasoning processes and be able to articulate them and be self-aware of them in order to know and believe things.
Mm. Yeah, I think I agree with that, largely speaking. So like I take it that what you're saying is sort of like this like the Pyrrhonian skeptics would have led back to like the Munchausen trilemma, when you're going through these sort of like regresses of justification. But it seems like what you're saying is, well, you really can't even get that far back. You have to go through so many steps of um, the processing of like your qualia, as you put it, which obviously is another contentious term that maybe like, I mean, I understand what you mean by it, so I think we can work with that. Um,
Yeah, I
so
mean, I also
you
just said sense perceptual experience is a little more neutral, but
yeah. So but
you
the
know,
idea being that like
it was just kind of like for example, the person who says, "Well, I became an atheist, or I became a Christian, or whatever else," and you say, "Well, how did you do that?" "Well, I went out and I surveyed all the major worldviews and religions and philosophies of the world, and decided that whatever I've concluded is the correct one." And I'm like thinking each one of those is a lifetime to understand from the inside, as some of the best exponents of that view do. I mean, I myself, like I have a little bit of knowledge of Buddhism, but there are people who have been studying Buddhism for 50 years. It'd be utterly ridiculous for me to think that I'm going to be able to speak authoritatively and for all time on the truth or falsity of Buddhism, because I'm just not in the position of some of those other individuals. So and it's just even more so when we're just talking about our knowledge of sense perception or memory or rational intuition or anything else. Or another huge one that I haven't talked about yet is testimony, how we form beliefs based upon the testimony of other people. In fact, back to our earliest formation as infants and small children, we're forming this enormous, including our entire language acquisition through testimony of other people. And so if we want to now go back and question whether any of that was justified, I mean, we're using language to do it. We just can't get outside of that.
yeah. No, I think I see what you're saying. I think you run into the stopping points a lot earlier than those skeptical arguments seem to imply, that you could get all the way back to like your grounding beliefs. Because I've tried to think about like, okay, I've sort of played around with like foundationalism. I think that that like makes sense to say that like, all right, there's certain beliefs that I can't justify, um, and I sort of like build the rest of my beliefs on top of those. But it seems like the way you're putting it, it's like it's fuzzy even in between those beliefs and like your higher level beliefs. Like trying to go from your higher level beliefs about like the way the sun comes up every day down to like fundamental axioms of like unjustified knowledge like doesn't, you can never really connect those dots.
Yeah, I think for the most part that's true. I mean, you may be able to do so in some very, very limited sense, but it's sort of like, again, studying philosophy or something else is like, if you want to opine on the history of Western philosophy authoritatively and want to claim that you really know everything that the pre-Socratics talked about and how they understood it and so on, straight up to contemporary philosophy, I mean, it's not going to happen. It's just impossible. The most that we could do is perhaps hope to master some small slice of Plato or Bertrand Russell or some other philosopher. And so it's the same thing again when it comes to just reasoning. One other thing in terms of the concern about getting things wrong. Now, I coined this term a while ago, and I don't know, maybe other people have the term as well, but it's doxophobia, which is just the fear of getting things wrong, as I've put it. Because I think that sometimes some of these skepticisms, they're so concerned about getting some belief wrong that it seems to me really constitutes a sort of something like a recognizable phobia or an irrational fear. It's like, what is the big thing about having to withhold belief in everything like some skeptics do, or as the Cartesian says, about having to establish certainty of it. It seems to me that both of those individuals have an irrational or could have an irrational fear of getting things wrong, when for the most part, I think we should just embrace the fact that we are fallible beings, not lose sleep over it.
Yeah, and I think that it actually, um, outside of a lot of like philosophical conversation, like that actually helps people if they were to accept something like that. That can actually help you have a lot less like anxiety and stress in your life. Um, what was it? I think this is a quote from Van Wilder with Ryan Reynolds. He says, "Don't take life too seriously. You'll never get out alive." So, so I
Yeah.
guess in certain contexts, like it does make sense. It's not always important that you're right. I mean, I think we do take it seriously just because when two people start to push their ideas into each other, you almost want to mount like as strong a defense as you can, just to see if you are right or not. But yeah, I think there is a tension with some people where like if they get pushed too far into seeing that they might be wrong, that they do like stiffen up and start to become like more irrational. But yeah, so let's see if I can bring it back to some of the other questions that we had. Um, yeah, I guess like the most common objection that I hear from people who aren't taking the idea too seriously is they'll say like, "Well, are you sure that you aren't sure?"
Um, yeah. Um, well, the one thing that we have to distinguish here is the distinction between psychological certitude and epistemological certainty. So, uh, do I have any doubt about something, like any existential doubt? Well, I may or I may not, but that's a psychological question. And that's just a different question from whether I could be wrong or not about something, the question of epistemic certainty or incorrigibility or indefeasibility. I mean, I think that that kind of comment is just trading on the ambiguity between those two different states. I'm happy to say that there are things about which I don't have any serious doubt. So even right now, as we talk, I don't have any serious doubt that I'm awake. But well, anyway, and so in that case, I would just say, like, psychologically, I'd be okay to say I'm certain. I'm not too rigorous about the use of that term. I'm certain that I'm awake. But do I have epistemic certainty of that? I wouldn't say so. For example, I mean, we have all these, many of us, right? We've had dreams where we thought we were awake. And I'll give you one example. About a year ago, I had a dream where I was looking at one of my motorcycle, and I was focusing on it. And then I became um, aware that the color on the gas tank is different than I remembered it being. So I said, I must be dreaming. So then I said, okay, to make sure I'm dreaming, I'm going to study the gas tank really closely, look at the paint very closely, and listen to and take in the environment around me, because dreams, in my experience, tend to have a instability to them, right? That they're very erratic, and you move on to the next thing before you know it, and that. So I paused and I looked very closely at the gas tank, and even though it was painted differently, it looked very clear. Nothing was changing, and then I suddenly heard music, like lightly playing in the background, like you might hear in a department store. And I could feel the warmth of the room and that, and I became certain that I was in fact awake. And then I woke up. So, and I thought that I was awake, and in fact, I was asleep. And those are the kinds of things that you could say would constitute defeaters for having epistemic certainty. And I'm okay saying that. But I can also say that I have psychological certitude that I'm awake. I can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it is a little bit of like an equivocation or like a difference in like sense of the word like sure, certain. Um yeah. So we touched on theories of truth. So I have like a few more things that I kind of wanted to go through, and then maybe we can open it up to some other people's questions if you don't mind, depending
Sure.
on how much time you have.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So on theories of truth, I wanted to ask you if you think that theories of truth are like outside of epistemology, because they sort of seem to be one of the components of knowledge. So like to say that like what you know what the theory of truth is, or what the correct theory of truth is, or the true theory of truth, right? Do you think that that sort of lies outside of like inference, like in general, or like should we are we supposed to reason about what truth is, or is that like prior to reasoning?
I mean, I tend to think of truth as a metaphysical question rather than an epistemic question. But um, but I'm also happy to say that it's really social convention that sort of draws somewhat of arbitrary lines between fields in philosophy, so that you have all these fields that border one another. I mean, if you want to talk about epistemology, you're also talking about philosophy of language, and yeah, you're also talking about truth from metaphysics, etc. So I think that these areas, they all overlap and abut one another, but I do tend to think of the definition of truth as a metaphysical question rather than an epistemic one.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah, I actually had a few questions that were related to the things that you brought up already. Yeah, do you think when people talk about justification that and different theories of justification that there's sort of like a common denominator between them, or are people really like talking past each other, um, and talking about different things when they think of justification and disagree about it?
In some ways, I don't feel equipped to address the question because I've been out of the literature for quite a while. I do think that when it comes either to justification or rationality, you certainly get among lay people. Um, Often, what you get is a use of the terms that pretty much maps onto their own intuitive sense of the nature of reality. So if they say something is irrational, what they're really saying is they're telling you something about their own plausibility structure or the way things seem to them, which doesn't tell you objectively about what justification or rationality is. In terms of academic philosophy, well, I do think that you do have this significant distinction between um, internalists and externalists with regard to those kinds of questions. And um, I mean, I was influenced by Alvin Plantinga back in the day, and so I tended to think of justification in terms of an epistemic obligation, or like a deontology, an obligation for an individual, as something not that you normatively shoulder with respect to just your general holding of a belief, but rather when there's a defeat or an objection presented to it, that's when you have to now have an obligation to respond to the defeater. And so I think that is an example where some of those internalist categories of justification are speaking into the externalist world in terms of obligation and that, but in a qualified sense. But I suppose in other cases people are talking past one another, and I'm again just not familiar enough with the conversation to say more about that.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Um, yeah, I guess maybe the last thing that we could just touch on is like, because we brought it up a few times, just externalism would be thinking of things in sort of like a external framework, apart from you, or how do you when you use the term externalism, um, what are you referring to exactly?
Yeah, there are different kinds of externalism. So externalism does mean like external to the individual or access of the individual or the awareness of the individual, but it can be applied to different things. So for example, you could have semantic externalism, which would mean you can maybe you can speak meaningfully and communicate with other people even though the full meaning of what you're even saying may be external to you, because maybe the meaning of what you are speaking is fixed by features of the world to which you don't have direct access or knowledge of. And so that could be a semantic externalism. But I tend to be thinking in terms of external with respect to these kinds of internal justifications or reasons for holding beliefs. So I do believe that there are conditions where you have to have reasons and that for holding things, that you have internal awareness of them. But just as a general stipulation, I don't think you need that. Like, for example, how do I know my sense perceptual faculties are reliable? I don't think that I need to be able to show that they're reliable again, to be able to see and feel the warmth of the sun, that how my vision itself even works is external to me. And there's just, give a little example here about how limited our knowledge is in so many things. There's this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where Calvin's dad is trying to teach him, and so Calvin points at a TV antenna and says, "What is that?" And his dad says, "Well, that's a TV antenna." And he says, "Well, what's a TV?" Or no, I'm sorry. Calvin says, "Look at that silver stick." And then his dad says, "Oh, that's not a silver stick. That's a TV antenna." And then Calvin says, "Well, how does it work?" And his dad has no answer to that. He doesn't actually understand how TV antennas work. And so then he ends up saying, "Well, yeah, it's basically a silver stick." Because you take advantage of a TV antenna every day, back when we had TV antennas everywhere, and yet you had no clue as to really how they work and how they transfer data from out in the world onto your television set. And that's similar to our cognitive faculties. So and then that's where you can be justified and reasonably accept the deliverances of these things, while the details of how they function remains external to you.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that went through most of the list of questions I had here. I don't know if you wanted to say like anything else, and then we can. I know that there was a few people in the audience who wanted to ask a couple of questions, and I will police and mod that, so that will not go anywhere other than questions. So,
Um,
but
yeah, I would just say that when it comes to discourse on, for example, social media channels, to come back to something I said earlier, we should all be more careful about declaring other people irrational and making those kind of sweeping stipulative statements about other people and their epistemic positions and convictions, um, until we know a little bit more about them, and try to be charitable, because it doesn't further the conversation when we kind of just drop the irrationality bomb or something, rather than try to understand what it is they actually believe and why they believe it.
yeah, I definitely agree. All right, I know Good Faith was asking to ask questions, so I'll see if he. Oh, there we go.
Hello, Dr.
Hello.
Rauser. Thank you for taking some questions.
Sure, my pleasure.
I have a couple here, but I wanted to start with, have you gone through the results of the Phil paper survey?
No.
Well, in the survey, there's kind of a lot of interesting results, I thought. But something I want to ask in relation to that is, if philosophers can't agree on which logic is uniquely correct, or which truth theory is uniquely correct, or which epistemic justification is uniquely correct, do you think it does matter what they can agree on?
The question's a little ambiguous. So, I mean, I'm just going to spitball a little bit, and then you can come back and reform the question for me, because I'm a little slow perhaps. But I think obviously, insofar as we can achieve agreement on something, then that's an important thing, and we should strive for it. But I also think the very nature of philosophy itself is such that there are perennial disagreements, back to like Plato and Aristotle, right, in 2,400 years ago. And those are just, I think that it's part of the human condition that we can continue to expect to see those disagreements. So the hope that we would ever converge upon, in the way that natural science does, on some sort of unified theory of X, whether it be truth or the nature of knowledge or the nature of language or something else, I think it's just not going to happen. So that we need to instead appreciate the intrinsic value of philosophy on its own terms, which does tend to allow for these kinds of perennial disagreements.
Would you agree that understanding what truth is a necessary precondition to making any other statements?
No, no, because people who are coherentists or pragmatists or deflationists or correspondence theorists about truth are all debating the nature of truth, even as they disagree as to what truth is. So that's a case where you say actuality entails possibility. So if it actually is happening that they're having a reasoned discussion about the nature of truth and attempting to persuade one another with reasons as to what they think truth is, then it would seem that agreement as to the nature of truth is not required in order to have that conversation.
Do you think incorrigibility implies truth?
Yeah, I mean, if I can't be wrong about something, then it would seem that it would entail that it is true. But of course, I think most of the things that we could confidently say are incorrigible for us are pretty trivial, such as I seem to be talking to you right now, right? In terms of certainty or incorrigibility, I could say that, but I could be dreaming, so I probably can't say more than that with epistemic certainty. So I think that incorrigibility does bring truth in its train, but you typically don't get much from incorrigibility.
And do you think consensus implies truth?
It depends on consensus of who. It doesn't entail it, but consensus certainly points to it, more so if you have consensus of relevant experts. So, if you have a consensus on human-induced climate change, then I think that we can have a high degree of confidence in human-induced climate change insofar as we have reason to trust and defer to the expertise of the consensus. Now, the fact that, let's say, a majority of a lay population doesn't accept human-induced climate change is of less interest to me. That if that's a consensus, it may be an uninformed one, and thus that's not of much value.
Do you take any stock in the pessimistic meta-induction about consensus over time?
I'm not familiar with that. At least it doesn't ring a bell at the moment.
Just
So
the idea that if you look at the consensus throughout history, it's just forever wrong and forever changing, presumably towards some truer end. But if you wanted to be pessimistic about it, you could kind of say, well, at time t, it's a coin toss whether the experts or consensus of experts are right.
yeah, I mean, I would be okay. What I think the thing that we have to kind of ask is, in the time and place that I'm now at, what is the best epistemic position for me to take? Obviously, if like you talk about climate change, I mean, climate skeptics love to go back to the mid 1970s, where some people were worrying about a mini ice age was soon to be upon us.
Yeah.
And so you kind of realize, yeah, you know what, we could be wrong now. There's no shortage of evidence that we've been wrong in the past, but I think we're still justified, and it's still the best position to go with the consensus unless we have good reason not to. And I think one of the concerns is that if we don't do that, we can kind of end up with QAnon conspiracies popping up everywhere.
And which fourth condition do you take for JTB?
Well, so the question is whether you take a fourth condition or whether you just kind of reject the ontological internalist framework of, like, in terms of whether justification itself is even an adequate criterion. So I would say I'm an externalist about knowledge, and like I was referring to earlier with Alvin Plantinga, I'm largely sympathetic with his proper function account of externalism. So this idea that we are cognitive faculties we are rational agents with cognitive faculties designed to achieve true beliefs when those cognitive faculties are functioning properly within appropriate maximal and mini epistemic environments. And so whether it's sense perception or rational intuition or anything else, I would think that's the starting point of discourse. And when it comes to the external or the internal rational obligations, for the most part, the things that we talk about with justification, those kick in when it comes to defeaters or objections raised to our beliefs.
So you don't think a fourth condition is required on your view?
No, I mean, I think of it in terms of, like, I don't require justification to begin with, right, as a normative. So I'm sort of saying it has value, but not as a general stipulation of the definition of knowledge itself. Knowledge is not defined, in my view, in terms of justification. So,
I mean, if someone holds to some incorrigibility, some infallibilist kind of conception of truth on one topic, let's say the cogito, right?
yeah.
Would that both either invalidate their ability to be fallibilists in other domains, or if not that, would it at least demonstrate something about a delineation between perhaps capital T truth and lowercase t truth, if you're willing to claim that something is infallibly true in a specific domain, at least one domain?
So one of the things that we can do, of course, this is classical or strong foundationalism, took the view that we could have certainty about some domains, namely sense perception. And so that's where you get into things like building from perceptions or the way things seem to be, and also rational intuitions. And from that, you could maybe build an epistemic structure. And the things that follow after that, including things like testimony and memory, do not have that status of certainty, but you can find it in that foundation. So there, I think, have been people that have taken a view like that. And you could even say that certainty is required in certain areas and not others. It's certainly possible that you could do that. And so to have knowledge in one area is required, certainty is required, but not others. But it's just that you'd have to have a theoretical construct to justify why you're requiring something in one area and not another. So that would be the only stipulation.
You had mentioned this delineation between certainty as a psychological state and epistemic certainty, and I've always wondered in how exactly this is cashed out, because I agree that certainty is a psychological state. One can be completely certain of something and be wrong, but what exactly is epistemic certainty, and how would it not depend on psychological states?
Epistemic certainty would be the objective condition that you could not, in fact, be wrong, that truth is guaranteed. Now, there's an interesting question there as to what is the exact relationship then between psychological certainty and epistemic certainty. It is reasonable to think that in order to have, I'll put it this way, in order to have epistemic certainty, you must have psychological certainty. But you could have psychological certainty and not have epistemic certainty, because you could be wrong about something but yet be certain of it, but you can't be epistemically certain of it. In other words, have attained that kind of knowledge of which you could not be wrong. You could not have that without also, in a sense, being aware of that, having that psychological certainty of it. And I'm just, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
I'm also wondering about threshold problems, both in like all through philosophy. And I don't know how much you know about these, but I'm wondering, like, for instance, in a sense and referent delineation, how off can the sense be and still refer?
Yeah, those are philosophy of language questions, or difficult questions like that. I'll tell you one area, and I can't really comment on that. I will say that I'm a Christian theologian, and one of the areas where that's an interesting conversation is between, let's say, Muslims and Christians.
Oh,
Are
yeah.
they referring to the same entity? Are they referring to the same, like, for example, when Christians who speak Arabic pray to God, they pray to Allah. They use the same word that Muslims do. Are they referring to the same being in light of the different theological constructs they have? And that's a sort of interesting question there. At what point are you no longer referring to God when you refer to this being with this particular understanding? So great questions. I'm not sure how to address them.
Did you watch the Trent Horn debate with Jay Dyer on this topic about reference to the monotheistic generic God?
No, I didn't. How did that
You
go?
Yeah, it was great. You would love it. I'd be very interested. Essentially, the argument centered around it's the whole set. There was some paper from a atheist philosopher in the Scandinavia that made the argument that there is no generic theistic God, and that ultimately it has to be the whole set of that you're referring to. Otherwise, it doesn't refer. But anyway, one of the last questions I had here is. Since you are a Christian philosopher, when you think of the cogito, do you think that knowledge of the cogito, I think it's in somewhere in the third meditation, do you think it requires the knowledge of the non-deceiving God?
I think that the Cartesian circle is inescapable in my view. Yeah, so I don't think that that you can get over the problem that the demon could have deceived you about believing that you are a thinking thing. I think it was it Bertrand Russell who said, in fact, the only thing you have certainty of is that there are thoughts. And anyway, some philosophers have argued that
Yeah.
even the idea of a thinking thing is an inference from there being thoughts to there being a unified substance that is a thinker of those thoughts. So I mean, interesting questions. How far you want to take the skepticism?
And what maybe in the last question, I don't know how many more I'm allowed here, but like, what's your opinion on the status of the liar's paradox in 2021? How do you think about that as a Christian?
Yeah, I'm one of those areas. That's one of the areas I haven't spent much time on, except I can say that Paul refers to it. He refers to Paul the Apostle refers to the liar's paradox in Titus, in the book of Titus. When he's referring to Cretans, he says one of their own have said that they are liars. And so it's this famous allusion to the liar's paradox within the New Testament. But in terms of how to think about the liar's paradox, and is it diatheletism, the idea of could there
Right.
be two truths and so on, that's just another area that I'm not really equipped to address directly.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say here is just, when I look at the field of epistemology, it strikes me that if people can just come onto the scene and choose a epistemic justification like coherentism or foundationalism, and even choose a truth theory, and then just begin to start making claims, there seems like an epistemic bootstrapping issue here, such that somewhere you have to make this first unjustified step, whether it's dogmatic stopping point with foundationalism, circularity and coherentism, or infinitism. And I don't understand how man unaided is supposed to get out of this, these three different horns. Maybe you can comment on that. Thank you so much for answering the question.
Sure. I mean, I think that it's a fair question to raise, and I think just the general, it's an example of the general phenomena that if you want to talk about anything, again, if I want to talk about world religions, I'm going to talk about it having been raised with a particular socio-historical background within a religious tradition, having been formed by that tradition, thinking through that tradition, and now coming with my limited perspective to all these other views. And I think that when it comes to academic philosophy, that is just a further example of the intrinsic human limitations that we have, that we can never aspire to that God's eye point of view, the sort of omniscience that can really figure out how everything is and how it works. And so that what we simply do is, to use a coherentist metaphor, our epistemic systems are in a sense like that raft that is out at sea. Neurath's raft, was it? And then he's like constantly trying to fix the raft and expand it and mend it as it's getting holes so that it keeps afloat. But yeah, you just begin with the raft at sea, and then you've got to continue to build it and defend it. There's never a point where you're on land, on terra firma, on the Cartesian certainty in a sense, and the God's eye perspective, and you can kind of survey all the positions and then justify the one that you're going to begin with.
Yeah, I liked that line of questioning too, and it made me think at one point. I was picturing the idea of like the web of beliefs, but like instead of a web that's like something you can traverse like in a orderly fashion, it's more like a Gordian knot of beliefs that you can't really unravel back to a source, even if there is a source, perhaps. But yes,
Or maybe like
Brenda had
a tangled bundle of Christmas lights, since I was putting up the lights the other day.
and if one goes out, they all go out. But yeah,
Yeah.
so Brenda had a couple questions too, if you still got time.
Sure.
Oh, hi, Dr. Randall, Dr.
Hi.
Rauser. Yeah, I have a question about, well, a lot of the people here, at least I think a lot of the people here are just, casual people interested in philosophy. How does one go about studying philosophy? I myself have taken some classes. I'm an older student, so I've taken some classes at the local university and stuff, but sort of as a general question, because I think a lot of people don't have a very it's just wherever their interest takes them. And but how would you like really seriously study philosophy?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. A great question. Of course, one of the things, there's this meme that goes around on the internet of this young woman that goes up to her dad and says, "Guess what, Dad? I decided to study philosophy in university." And then the dad responds, "Oh, that's great, because they just opened a new philosophy factory in town, and there'll be a lot of philosophy jobs there." And of course, the point being that there's not a lot of jobs to be found in philosophy. Something like philosophy, you do it for the very name of it, right? The love of wisdom, Philosophia, because there's not a lot of jobs in it. And so one of the things to keep in mind then is how can you do philosophy in a way that is economically accessible as well? Because yeah, you could do a degree at a well-known university like Notre Dame and spend $100,000. But I would say that there are a lot of, in fact, we are in the golden age in a sense for information accessibility. And one thing that I would suggest in terms of like beyond, there's of course an enormous number of books that are available online, including for free, including Google Scholar, and a lot of great deals on Kindle for books. There's endless lectures available on YouTube and so on. But some of those things, the challenge is to curate, right? You need a curator, someone to guide you through the field. So if you want to go in at a deeper level and take more courses, but maybe without having to pay for them, there are MOOCs. So a MOOC is, I believe the acronym is Massive Open Online Course. So if you search MOOC and philosophy, you'll come up with a range of courses in philosophy that are at leading universities, many of them. And they will register, they'll run like a regular course of like 10 weeks or something, and they might register 20,000 students. And I'm not sure the economics of MOOCs and how they do make money and so on, but you could do that. So for example, MOOC.com or Coursera.org, you could look at those as options for academic study of philosophy. And that gives you the same kind of material that you can find online in places like YouTube, but also in a way that is very helpfully curated so that it guides you through the material. Because one of the challenges for every person who is self-taught is that we don't know what we don't know. And so if we do teach ourselves, we might end up focusing just on things that were of interest to us and that, but it might end up like the guy who weightlifts and he always works out his biceps, but he never works at anything else. So he's got huge arms and then the rest of him is scrawny. And a curated course gives you a well-rounded intellectual muscle when it comes to philosophy. So I would recommend taking a look at that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm actually going to check that out for sure. I don't know if anybody else had questions in the audience. I think I could probably pull a couple more. If anybody wants to raise their hand if they have questions, feel free.
I got about 5 minutes left if it works.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that he seems like he'd be a nice person, but I think he's a little bit of a troll.
I can agree to that. Yeah, he probably is. The McFlurry thing was definitely trolling, but was also like kind of funny. So,
Yeah, here the thing is that someone like him, again, I'm sure he's a nice guy sharing a beer with him, but the problem is that a lot of the people that tune into his channel think that people that don't hold views similar to theirs are idiots. And so when you do the kinds of things that tend to be like trolling, what you do is really reinforce their self-satisfaction that other people are idiots. And I don't think that that furthers discourse. And again, I think in our highly oppositional social media context today, we need to try to build bridges with people of differing views as much as possible and to get over this person's really irrational and they're suppressing something and they're stupid and kind of get to more charitable and rigorous discourse. So that would be my view.
yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I respect you quite a bit. I think a lot of the stuff you've said tonight I've really agreed with. And it's been really informative to me. And I appreciate you taking the time to come on here. I know this is your first time on Discord, so joined a new app and everything just to come on here, and I really appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back at some point. If you'd ever be interested. We tend to do stages here. A lot of them are about like the existence of God and things like that. Some of them are a little bit like dumpster fire, kind of not as intellectual perhaps, but we're trying to raise the bar a little bit, and I think this was a good step.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Rauser.
You bet. Okay. Take care. See you guys.
Take it easy. All right, so we can do an after show. I wanted to get like a recording there, so I'll change this to after show. see. Yeah, yeah. I hope that went well. Yeah, I was trying to keep it on like a more serious level. And then I got Graham Oppie coming up too. So that's more going to be an AMA. This one was going to be more of like a discussion on a topic. But let's see. Let's scroll up to this events list. Discord is not working. It's like December. There we go. December 6th, Monday. So it's a couple weeks from now, 2 weeks from today. 7 p.m. EST. So it's like 6 Central or something like that. So that'll be cool. Yeah, Graham Oppie is another like really interesting person. And that one could center more on like atheism, theism. Like I kind of wanted Rauser to talk less about that and more about like the other stuff, which we did. So that was good. I hope you guys liked it. I mean, the audience seemed pretty stable. So does anybody want to come up and tell me I did a bad job? Come up and tell me. Get up here.
You did a
Yeah.
great job, Quantum. Sorry to burst your bubble. That was a good job. I'm wondering if you or TJump, if you guys followed his line when he was talking about a difference between psychological certainty and epistemic certainty. My question there was, how would knowledge of the epistemic certainty not somehow reduce to psychological states? And I didn't really follow his answer. Maybe you guys did.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's thinking of it more like having a feeling of certainty. Um, would be like the idea I would think. Like it's
Well,
not even
however you
like
cash out psychological certainty, I'm just asking how you would explicate the difference between psychological certainty and epistemic certainty, and how it wouldn't somehow depend on a psychological state or
well, it's
psychological
like
certainty.
you can feel
justified. So it wouldn't be an internal state if you have an externalist view of knowledge.
But something I don't understand about externalism is it all reduces back to your mind. Like it's all coming from your mind.
Well, it's like saying if I believe the sky is blue, if the sky is blue, then the fact the sky is blue is independent of my mind. My belief the sky is blue is in my mind, but the knowledge
well,
is conditional on its correspondence to like the fact of the matter independent. So the external part of the knowledge is since he's an externalist, the fact of the matter of whether or not it's knowledge is external, not internal. So it's not a psychological thing.
Right,
like
but how? I mean, this gets into like Kantian and Berkeley type questions about idealism.
well, what he's saying is like you can feel completely certain and you can think you're certain, right, about something. But he's saying like it is the case that you still could be wrong. Like so that's where he's coming from when he says it's external to you. He's saying
I mean,
like
I completely agree with that, and that's why I'm trying to figure out how the heck epistemic certainty could somehow be divorced from that.
he's saying like epistemic certainty is it being the case that you could not be wrong. Like,
And we would know that not through our minds.
well, that's a different question, right? That's a different question. How you would know that you had epistemic certainty. He's going to say that like he's a fallibilist, so he's saying that that doesn't make sense. But
Well, no. So externalism is the position that someone can't have access to one of the knowledge basis principle thingies. So it's there, but your psychological thing can't access it. So there's an external feature of knowledge which is there, and it determines whether or not it's knowledge independent of your psychology. So your psychological beliefs are there, and if they also meet this external criterion, which you don't have access to, you have knowledge regardless of your psychological state. Your psychological state doesn't matter at this point. just whether or
Well,
not
let's
it
just
matches
whisper,
that.
right? It could be the case, like let's just say hypothetically, it could be the case that nature like made you and your mind and body in such a way that you could never be wrong about anything, right? He's saying like that is clearly not the case, right? So you have to take that into account. Like he's saying like you can't have that sort of epistemic certainty, but like if you could, it would be like that. It would be like the state of affairs has made it such that you couldn't be wrong about things or a thing or everything.
It sounds like a big conditional to me. It almost sounds like when Plantinga says something like, well, if it is the case that God is real, then it's properly basic to believe in God.
Well, yeah, that's he mentioned he was influenced by Alvin Plantinga, and he is accepting that there are properly basic beliefs, I think, in some cases. So he definitely accepts that kind of epistemology. That is an externalist epistemology.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's pretty based personally for a theist. So, I mean, I like a lot of the stuff he was saying, like about pragmatism and such.
Yeah, externalism doesn't have anything to do with like the mind-body dualism or internal or externalism. It's just saying that the justification can be justified not by internal psychological states, justified by some external thing.
I get that. I just think that these questions, if you were to go deep on them, would still somehow need to at least go by the question of idealism and how we get to the external world from an internal state.
You mean solipsism? Like that's not idealism.
Well, no, about knowing again whether you take a correspondence theory of truth, right, or you have sympathies towards the things that Berkeley and Kant were talking about in terms of the mind's relationship to the external world. To then speak about externalist justification, right, would already presuppose that you've dealt with those arguments.
Well, no. So because the default position is we don't know, and then if you the positions for the idealist position would require its own justification. So simply the externalist justification of knowledge doesn't presuppose materialism or idealism. It's irrelevant. It doesn't. Neither one to matter to the conversation.
Said, like, on like the internalist questions, he said that he was like sympathetic to like sort of like a naive realist position anyway. So that's
yeah. I guess if you take the naive realist position, then you could do that.
But like especially couching it in the idea that like you could be wrong because you know, typically like that's going to be the problem with like naive realism is you're going to say things like, well, it looks like there's an oasis, but it's really a mirage, right?
Well, what do you think about like the contextualist answer here, where the contextualist wants to say S knows P at C1 and S does not know P at C2, right? Do you think that at C2, when the context is different and the contextualist wants to say, okay, well, I guess I don't know P in this context. Do you think it was wrong for the contextualist to say they knew P at C1?
Depends.
I mean, not in their view, no.
Like you can think you know something and then be wrong about it and then say, oh, I didn't know it, but I thought I knew it.
But you would say that you can't be wrong about the cogito, right, Tom?
Yep. Yeah, like someone can't say, "Oh, I was wrong about knowing I was existing at time." They that would be like a silly statement to say. So that one they wouldn't be wrong about that one. There's no point when they'd be like, "Oh, I was wrong at that time that I thought I existed."
So you think your truth about the cogito is not a fallibilist conception of truth?
No, it's infallibilist. That's the whole point. It's one of the things that is infallible. So
And
fallibilism applies to more like external world stuff, the probabilistic stuff.
Well, I guess I would pose the question to you that I posed to him, which is, do you think that because you're a fallibilist about most things, but not about the cogito, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Do you think that says something deep about the nature of truth?
No.
Do you think it at least admits of two different categories, like a capital T truth and a lowercase t truth?
No, it says something about knowledge, not truth. Truth is the same in all of them. It's the justification part that it says something about.
But truth is a subset of knowledge. It's the T.
Truth is a subset of knowledge.
The JTB, justified true belief.
So
Yeah, it's
truth is
part.
independent of knowledge entirely. Like things are true regardless of whether or not you know them. So the part about if the fact that I can be infallibly know something like I exist, but not infallibly know something like the world is round or something, doesn't say anything about the truth. The truth is the same in both of those statements. The difference is the justification. The justification is different, which is what makes it fallibilist versus infallibilist. The truth is the same. There's no difference in truth there.
But there's all these competing theories of truth.
So
to say that, because to some people, truth, is like some people are nihilists about truth, right? So I'm just trying to understand. Well, I'm trying to understand how exactly you say it's just the same in all senses. Like, do you just mean it's the same in a particular sense?
In reference to reality, they both exist in the same way. Whatever way that is.
So you think that infallibilist conceptions of truth are completely okay. It just depends on what we're talking about.
Sure. Yeah, you can definitely say some things are infallibly known. Yes. And it's possible that we can get some possible way to know things infallibly about the external world also. And so that would definitely be a possibility for the future. So there's nothing inherently wrong with an infallibilist position of knowledge. Just saying it's infallible, therefore it's wrong would obviously not make any sense.
Yeah, definitely. But so do you consider yourself a foundationalist?
Depends on what you mean. Like epistemic, sure. Like from the cogito.
Yeah, epistemic.
Sure, from the cogito.
Well,
okay.
Wait a minute. Would that be foundationalism, or it seems like you'd be taking the circularity horn?
No.
Well, because you either have to say it's like if it's unjustified, then it's foundationalist.
Right. So I say I exist, and I know I exist, but I don't know how I exist. Echo. So like when the whole point of the whole Darth Dawkins, well, what is your existence isn't one of the foundational necessary thingies. I'm like, you're right, it's not. I don't go back to that. I just say I know I exist, and I don't know anything prior to that. So it's not known to me epistemically how I came to exist or what my consciousness is, but I can still use that as an epistemic foundational basis to build the other knowledge claims I have.
Right. I say the same thing. It's just that like I can't justify it further back than that.
I've heard this referred to as cogito foundationalism.
Yeah.
But so presumably, if you accept kind of the foundationalist justification criteria, then do you have a problem with other people having dogmatic things as their foundation that they are, that are incorrigible to them? Like, do you offer them this?
Well, I don't have a problem with anybody taking any epistemology they want. The question is like, can we analyze it to realize one is more reasonable than the other? And I'd say yes. People can start with whatever gibberish they want. I don't care. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
But so like when Plantinga says that his belief in God is properly basic, I assume you have a problem with that.
Well, I think it's an error that we can demonstrate. I wouldn't have him presenting that as a potential epistemology isn't inherently a problem. The problem is that, well, the consequences would be some person can have a properly basic belief of X and some person can have a properly basic belief of not X, and they're both equally justified by that epistemology. So it seems like a very silly epistemology.
But you said you hold to that epistemology, right? Foundationalism?
No, not his. Properly basic beliefs, I don't have any properly basic beliefs. So just saying it's a false equivalence to say, oh, he's using foundationalism. Oh, and you are too, therefore the same. Like, no, that's not the problem here. The problem here is the reason he claims that a God is his foundational thingy. Without any, that doesn't work. It just doesn't work to say that. Whereas someone can't have a properly basic belief that I exist and a properly basic belief I don't exist. That wouldn't,
Well,
it wouldn't work.
the way I argue it is like you can't you can't tell me you can't tell me that you believe in God unless you believe in God. So the you comes before you believing anything else, right? So everybody's tacitly accepting I exist before they like make any sort of statement or like have any sort of belief. Uh, Um,
Well, I think
so I
I think his
consider
criticism here is more that if you accept one thing as your foundational basis of foundationalism, then anybody who sets anything as their foundational basis is equivalently justified, and that's false.
no, I agree. But the reason that it's false is because there's actually only one set of these sort of unjustified like beliefs that everybody's holding to.
Well, I mean, to be clear, my critique is that um, if we accept dogmatic stopping points that have no further justification as a valid starting point, not getting into assessing their proper basicality, not getting into the great pumpkin objection, if we just accept that that is the landscape for foundationalism, then you're going to get stuck in needing an infinite regress of needing to provide a justification criteria for your justification criteria if you then start arguing about proper basicality and whose properly basic belief is in fact the correct one.
No, that's just false. Like, that's just a false equivalence of saying, well, if you accept one foundation, then all foundations are equal. Like, no. Like,
But that's the nature of a dogmatic stopping point.
no. Like, again, saying one dogmatic stopping point is not equivalent to all other dogmatic stopping points. And mine is, the fact that I have experience isn't justified. But I don't need to justify it. Like, that's not, I literally just am having the experience, or that itself is the justification. That's perfectly fine. That's not completely different from saying there is a magical square circle unicorn pixie thingy, and that's my new foundational belief. Like, there's lots of different factors you can use to evaluate that, and it's clearly dumb to say something that is baseless and just call that your foundation, which is arbitrary, versus something which is not baseless. Like,
okay, well, so then incorrigibility isn't the metric for proper basicality. It sounds like you would reduce it maybe to something like reason and logic.
what? Well, incorrigibility just means you can't be wrong. That's what the word means. I don't know what you're even saying there.
When you can't be convinced that you're not having the experience of existing, right?
Well, convincing
And you're
doesn't make a
saying that,
difference here. Convincing is irrelevant. You can be convinced that you don't exist. That's a possibility.
okay, sorry, let me say that the experience that you're having such that you feel that you can't be wrong that you exist, right? You're saying that that is of a different order than perhaps someone else's properly basic belief, right?
Right.
It's somehow more justified.
Yes, because mine can't be
And you would
wrong
say
and
that,
theirs can be wrong.
right? And you would say that really it's about rationally assessing via logic what would be the best candidate for a properly basic belief.
No, I'd say it's a description of something that you are literally doing right now. So, like, my experience, it's not, the rationality part is irrelevant. It's like, I am simply describing a thing I am literally doing right now.
But you talked about being demonstrable, right?
Demonstrable? No, I didn't.
Like you said that the experience you're having, like, it's demonstrable that you're having this experience.
I don't know what that means. Like, I'm having it, and that demonstrates it.
But for instance, you couldn't demonstrate to me that you're not a pea zombie, right?
Sure, but what does that have to do with the conversation? Like, I only need to do it to myself. Like, if I have an experience, that's sufficient. What you know doesn't matter.
So the criteria for proper basicality is one.
Well, no, there's no proper basicality. There's no properly basic beliefs in my system at all.
So then you're not a foundationalist. I'm sorry, I thought you.
No, you can be a foundationalist without properly basic beliefs. Like, that doesn't follow. You don't need proper basicality. There's lots of foundationalists that don't have proper basicality at all. Basic beliefs are something that like Plantinga came up with, not foundationalists. Foundationalism existed way before Plantinga did.
Well, I get that he is just a modern foundationalist, but
he created
it's my
properly. He created
understanding.
the concept of properly basic is something he made up. You do not need that in foundationalism. It is not a subset of foundationalism, or it's not foundationalism is not a subset of properly basic. Properly basic is a subset of foundationalism. You don't need that to be a foundationalist. Nowhere does it say that anywhere in foundationalism.
But you would agree that having a belief that requires no further justification is part of foundationalism.
Sure, in that sense, which is just.
And how do we differentiate between competing ideas for what qualifies for that?
Direct experience. Like I'm directly experiencing it. I'm just describing the thing I'm directly experiencing. So I can't be wrong. You can be wrong. That's a good way to describe that. This is not hard. Like this is just a way pointless semantic debate here. It's an obvious difference here between Invisible Sky Daddy and I exist. Like trying to actually articulate a formal description between the two is just kind of a waste of time. Like I don't need to. It's obvious. Like if you can't see it, it's just.
I know you're very convinced of your position, but
well,
I think
so anyone who's not convinced is a dumbass. That would be the position. So I don't need to explain it in any formal detail. If you need that, you're just stupid. So any rational mind can understand the difference between I exist and Invisible Sky Daddy exists.
But that's not what I mean, I would agree with that. What I'm trying to ask here is what the criteria is that we use to differentiate between two competing senses of what qualifies as not needing further justification. And you're saying direct experience.
Yes, directly experiencing my existence.
And if someone has a direct experience of God, you have a problem with that.
Yes, because their direct experience could be wrong. Can you have the experience of God and it be false? Yes. Can you have the experience of yourself and it be false? No.
Wait, here's a better question. Can you have the experience of God, but like you don't exist? Better question.
Same question, just different word. It's a good one.
Yeah.
I like it.
No. I'm showing him that you're this one axiom is like logically prior to the other. Like you have to exist before you can do any of this other stuff at all. So
that's why
like,
I brought up that's why I brought up Descartes' third meditation. There's some discussion about knowing the non-deceiving God, right? Like once you know you exist, then there's discussion about kind of the evil God question. Like, could you be being deceived about the nature of your existence, or what exactly follows?
That isn't the point. Like the point is that if you're talking about like what makes one foundational belief better than another, is that like there's a certain set of them that are actually like epistemically necessary that can't be avoided.
So so my foundationalist entailment is a part of all other foundational entailment. So if you believe God exists as your foundation, you also necessarily believe you exist to have the experience that God exists, whereas mine doesn't. So mine would be simpler in that case. There's less parts to it.
Yeah. Dr. Rauser brought up Bertrand Russell's critiques of what exactly can be inferred from thoughts happening. I know that
he agrees with me on that one. So we've talked about this. So the fact that I exist doesn't mean I'm made of material, or I'm made of a soul, or I'm made of dualism. You can't say the ontology of the I, but it's still you. You can just say I'm whatever that is. That's what I am.
And you could just be thoughts in some metaphysical way that you don't understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not?
Therefore, the external world could just be an illusion.
Yeah, that part isn't a part of the cogito. The cogito, the external world isn't a part of the cogito. The cogito is just the thoughts.
The external world is actually like another axiom that you kind of have to take, in my view, because
I don't.
It's another thing that's epistemically necessary in the sense that like you're not actually learning about anything if everything is just your own mind. And
I don't think that's true. Like you can still have a mind and have a subset of your mind which is built around an illusory world. You'd still be learning about the subset of your mind.
It would just be like a little part. It would just be like a little set, like a partition in your mind that's like expanding around. Like it's like, you know what I mean? Like it would just be like.
Yeah, but what would be the problem with that?
I mean, it's not that it's a problem in that it's like impossible ontologically. It's just that it's there wouldn't actually be knowledge there. So
Why not?
it's the same reason why like there's no like inferences like it's the same reason why there's like problems for like an omniscient like mind basically, or like a mind that knows all the things that there are like issues with that.
Well, the omniscient mind paradox, Wittgenstein's paradox of omniscience, says there's no way for a mind to know all facts and to know it knows all facts, because it leads to like the Russell's paradox, kind of a set theory paradoxes. But that wouldn't be a problem for this example, because this example is saying I know that that part of my brain is operating in this way. There wouldn't be a contradiction there. That could still be knowledge.
Well, the idea is that like so it's if you have an epistemology or not, right? So it's like does an omniscient being have epistemology? Because it doesn't acquire knowledge, right? It doesn't come to knowledge.
Sure, you could just say it has all knowledge and it just starts
Right.
with it or something. And so, but it wouldn't need an epistemology at that point. That would be fine. Like you can just say it would be a new class of knowledge that we just haven't defined yet. That's like ontological knowledge or something. So it wouldn't need an epistemology. It wouldn't need a way to learn about knowledge, but that wouldn't necessarily mean it doesn't have any.
And you disagree with quantum that if your first foundational belief is the cogito, that you would need to have then yet another foundational belief about the external world?
Yeah, I come to the external world purely inductively. So it's just my brain can't predict the future. These hypothetical models that entail the external world can predict the future. Therefore, it's reasonable to believe the models correspond to reality and not my mind. So I use a non-foundationalist justification for that. That's all based on the cogito. So there's not a foundationalist position.
I mean,
But
I don't see how you get to the external world from like any sort of like empirical or like inductive inference. Like,
Well, I mean, I literally just said it. So my mind can't predict the future. But this model that says there's an external world can predict the future. Therefore, it's reasonable to believe that model is right.
but like that's all still consistent with it.
Doesn't
not
matter.
Being
Doesn't matter if it's consistent. I
Okay.
don't know why people keep saying that. It's irrelevant if it's consistent with other hypotheses. If that model makes predictions about the future and my mind can't, it's better. It's reasonable to believe that hypothesis is true. It doesn't matter. All of this is still in my mind. It doesn't make a difference. It doesn't prove it's external, but it gives me a good inductive reason to conclude
Why
it.
is it reasonable if it's still consistent with both?
Again, consistency doesn't matter here. It's irrelevant. The fact is, it can predict the future. I can't. So I can like use my brain to try and predict the future. It doesn't work very well. This model, which entails that there is an external world, can predict the future. Therefore, it's reasonable for me to grant whatever that model says. Everything that model says, I can just say that's
like,
likely to be true because it can predict the future.
But like we're coming up with those models in our.
It doesn't matter.
minds.
That's irrelevant.
But
So I come up with a model in my mind. If the model can predict the future, then anything the model predicts is reasonable to believe. If I say there is a round square in my back pocket and I can predict the next lottery numbers for the next 10 things and it gets it right, that is reason to believe there is a round square in my back pocket.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that any of the facts are actually like in an external reality.
If one of the principles in the theory is there is an external reality and the theory can predict the future, I have reason to believe every single one of the facts in the theory.
Yeah, but but that's like doing like an addition in like a logical proof, because you could just add that it's not external.
Yes, you could make a different theory. You could make a different theory and say, I think the world is idealistic and make predictions. And if that works, then you have a reason to believe that model. But again, whichever one comes first wins. You being able to post hoc do it loses.
No, but it's like you have to do like theoretical virtue considerations, like by putting both on the table.
Nope. Whichever one comes first wins. That's the delineating factor. So if I have a theory, there's an external world and it came first and it made predictions better than anything else, that one wins.
But I mean, okay, but all the scientists in like the 1800s were like idealists.
Did they make any testable predictions with that? Nope.
Yeah, but like all the predictions that they made
were not founded on idealism.
But they weren't physicalists, though.
They didn't. Nope. They were still making,
Like,
like, I think all of them were actually. So the first scientists ever, externalists, like all humans were externalists at one point before religion, before idealism was a thing. So it all started with externalism. So first was externalism, and now it's all externalism. Even if everything started as idealist, the fact that today all the predictions are made under externalism, that's reason to believe externalism, because it makes the
but
predictions
like,
now.
it's hard for me to. I don't think that it's like that's the theory that's making the prediction, really.
Well, it doesn't matter. Again, if a theory makes predictions and succeeds, it's reasonable to grant every gibberish thing the theory says.
I don't know about that.
When you say your mind can't predict the future, like, do you know what you're gonna dream next?
No.
And this future that you're referring to in the model that it can predict, how do you justify that not being part of your mind?
It doesn't matter again. So anything in the hypothesis, if it works, is reasonable to believe. So if I say in the hypothesis there is an external world, if there's an external world, here's what I expect to see, and you see it, it's reasonable to believe everything in the model, including there's an external world.
Yeah, but it has to actually follow from it being
Nope.
external, though.
Nope.
It
No, it
doesn't.
doesn't. No, it
No,
doesn't.
but it
That's
does, 'cause
no,
otherwise
no, it
it's just
doesn't.
an extraneous, like,
It's perfectly
it
fine.
wouldn't be.
Perfectly fine. So if you can
No.
say there's a round square, there is a round square in my pocket. If there's a round square in my pocket, here are the next lotto numbers. You get all the lotto numbers right. That is justified reason to believe there is a round square in your pocket. Logical following is not irrelevant here. Not relevant at all. Like if the Bible, like this is one of the things in the Bible. Like if the Bible said God created the universe, if God created the universe, Jesus rose from the dead, and Jesus rose from the dead. Obviously, it doesn't logically follow that if Jesus rose from the dead, God exists. But because it accurately made a prediction, that's all you need. It doesn't matter.
All right.
It doesn't matter if
Let
there's a
me ask
Trinity.
you
It
a
doesn't matter if there's a heaven and hell. Those things don't follow from this. It doesn't make a difference.
Let me ask you a quick hypothetical. If Einstein wrote down like the general theory of relativity, right, and then at the very end he put plus God exists.
Yep. Yep. That would be evidence of God. Like if he said, God is the basis of this theory, that would be evidence of God. Then it would take another theory that has more stuff to do it better. Because the consequence of accepting
just has nothing to do with that.
doesn't matter.
Like,
Doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. Literally, I've answered this so many times. It literally does not matter. The consequence of the epistemology that you're suggesting is literally every fact would just be nothingness. Because every single theory has lots and lots of those that don't follow. It doesn't make a difference. Like it doesn't follow that space-time exists. It doesn't follow that space-time exists, that every single prediction Einstein made was right. It could just be something else. Does it matter? No, it doesn't matter at all.
But it's like anything that he posits in the theory like plays a role in the predictions that the theory makes.
No, they don't.
You can't just say like plus triangles are like flying around my bedroom right now and like
no. So again, I said that's wrong many times. I'm going to continue to say it's wrong as many times as you want to hear. If you have a random book that says Magical Sky Daddy did it and it makes predictions and it gets it right, then Magical Sky Daddy. Does it entail it? No. Do you need it? No. It's irrelevant. The fact that it gets the predictions right about the world, even if it seems like gibberish to you, that's a reason to accept the book. So if it doesn't make a difference whether or not you can draw a connection between the two. So we can just say a bunch of random gibberish letters and numbers and then comes up with a sentence like that makes tons of predictions. Then like, oh well shit, I don't know anything it's saying before, but it's probably right because it got these predictions right with a high level of accuracy. That's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree with giving credence to an idea that makes predictions. It's just that like I don't extend it to like peripheral like conjunctive like.
Right, I understand that's what you're saying. You're saying the same thing you've said like 10 times, which is wrong. If you have a book of gibberish and the gibberish books makes predictions and every one of the predictions comes true, then the book of gibberish is reasonable to believe. If you cannot make a connection between the gibberish and the predictions, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's still reason. You are justified in believing the gibberish. You're justified in believing anything the gibberish says. If the next 10 lines say square circles exist, you are reasonable in believing square circles exist. I've gone over this a million times. Nothing you're saying matters here. Gibberish book, predictions right. That is a justification. You are now justified in believing you have knowledge that the book is true. anything in it. So you just think about it, say a random book pops out of the sky, and everything you read in it is an accurate prediction. Anything else you read in the book, you are personally justified in believing the truth that in the book, of everything in the book. And the more things it gets right, the more you're justified in believing the next or previous things, regardless of whether or not there's a connection to what you're actually reading in the predictions. Like it makes a prediction about lottery numbers. It gets 30 lottery numbers correct. And then it makes a prediction about when it's going to rain or something. You are justified in believing it's going to rain, even though there's no connection between the lottery numbers and the rain. Like, right? Does that make sense? Like, you can make predictions about the lottery numbers, and if you get those right, you are also, by extension, justified in believing things that are completely separate from the lottery numbers.
I don't think that that's like how I would accept like a theory. I don't think that's how it's done in science.
Well, it is actually, but so if you had a book that accurately predicted the wait, you're just not understanding the crop. So if you had a book that gave you predictions of every lottery number, got every single one of them right 10 times in a row, would you trust the book when it said it's going to rain on this date? Would you say that's probably correct, or would you say I don't really know?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean.
Most rational people are like, yeah, I'm going to trust the book. The book was right on everything else. I'm probably going to go with the book because the book was really, really good on this stuff that's really, really hard. And that's reasonable. That's rational. That's justified. Now, whether you accept it as justified, don't really care. But yeah, all rational people are like, yeah, let's do it. Trust the book.
I don't know. I just don't think so. Like 2 points I'll say. Like, I don't think that like scientific papers generally invoke like materialism is true or like something like that at the outset of a paper. That might be something that people who write it believe, right? But like,
doesn't matter.
There's that. Well, the point is that like for somebody who's like an idealist, like which is not me, but like somebody who is like they don't necessarily have to they don't have to disagree with anything in like a science paper.
Never said they did. It's also irrelevant.
So it's like to say that it like is proving like.
And again, never said it was proving. This is a justification thing. Like you just nothing you see. This is why it's so hard to talk to you, because you're just not addressing any of the actual points being said. Like are you justified in believing everything a book says if it gets consistent testable predictions? Does not make any difference if it's relevant. Yes. The answer is yes. Yes, you are. Like, do you disagree with that statement? Do you think a book that makes 1,000 testable predictions that are all right, are you justified in believing everything else in the book?
I guess.
That's all you need. That's it.
But at the same time, like...
So forget science, forget all the bullshit. Say, if I have a hypothesis in my brain, there is an external world, and that hypothesis makes testable predictions, that's my book. I'm reasonable to believe the whole other parts of the book that says there's an external world, because it makes the predictions and gets them right for the exact same reason. The same justification.
Yeah, but somebody else could do the same thing, but like the opposite way.
Sure, and if they start making testable predictions and it works, great. Then they are justified. It just hasn't been done.
Yeah, but the point is they'd be making the same predictions, though.
That's irrelevant. Again, irrelevant. That doesn't make a difference. So as soon as if idealists started to take over science and they were like, I think the world is idealist and they're going to start making testable predictions and they make the most progress in the world, then yeah, it's rational. Go for it. Until that happens, not rational.
What do you think about underdetermination?
It's a thing.
Well, when in the sense of like many theories being able to explain certain evidence.
Yes, there's infinitely many theories that can explain all collections of evidence necessarily.
And how do you map that onto the discussion you're having with quantum?
The one that's first is the one that's justified.
Yeah, but first, like, with respect to what?
To your ability to make predictions?
No, but, like, are you talking about, like, the first one you've seen, the first one that's ever existed in, like, the world?
Well, it's the first one that's making modern testable predictions. So, like, if you have a new prediction, this hypothesis makes this prediction. It's like, yeah, right, that works. That's it. So it's like if one made predictions 1,000 years ago, and there's another one that made a new prediction that the other one didn't, then the old one gets replaced with the new one. So the one that's making the newest predictions first currently.
But you would agree that someone could have novel testable predictions and their underlying theory about the law could be incorrect,
Sure,
right?
like Newtonian physics, but it's fine. It was still justified to believe Newtonian physics because it got the predictions right.
Right. I think that obviously is a second order question, but
Well,
what
that was the
again?
exact example of what you asked. Like, could you have a epistemology that has a basis in physics that's wrong? Yes. That gets right predictions? Yes.
Oh, I was sorry. I was just delineating between whether or not it's reasonable to believe X at time t based on some amount of novel testable predictions,
Yes.
and then whether or not the underlying theory itself could still be incorrect despite the novel testable predictions. Those are kind of two
Yes,
different
like
things. Yeah.
Newtonian mechanics. That's literally the example I gave. It made lots of novel predictions. They were all right, and it was underlying theory was wrong.
Is it just
Yeah, and
skepticism or pragmatic belief?
Pragmatic epistemology, sure.
Yeah. Like you use it so it gets results.
Yes, like novel predictions. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I had a question. This is separate from your topic.
Go for it.
You made a comment about psychology, and I made a comment about psychology.
Psychology is stupid?
Yeah, psychology is stupid. Do you really believe that?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's so bad at everything.
Uh,
Most of
I'd
psychology
love to jump now.
most of psychology is like the DSM-5 is all kind of just guesswork and garbage. Most of it's wrong. Most of it's made up. Most of the work in psychology has nothing to do with actually helping people. It's mostly about changing their psychology. Like, we want to change the way you think to change the way you act so that you fix yourself and do absolutely nothing to help you in life. Psychology is garbage and
You mean
spends
like
you a lot of money doing it.
medicine,
Amen.
medicinal psychology, or just psychology in general? Because I was gonna say the
Well, I
study
mean,
of behavior is kind of like we use that in everything. So it's kind of interesting.
well, like, so that's those soft sciences are where the reproducibility problem is most virulent. So even in academic psychology, it's still pretty garbage, but it's most garbage when it's applied to people as like treating them is where it's most garbage. Like
Yeah,
Freud,
it's
like when you think of Freud, you think he's garbage. His method of curing people was garbage. And today is not much better. It's the Freud of today. They're still garbage.
right. But it's kind of one of those what is it, the work in progress thing. You have to have it in some regard, or
Sure.
else you just chaos. And then it's terrible. It's not, as efficient as it could be. But I mean, as a whole, I would say there's a lot of good stuff that comes from it. There's a lot
Sure.
of bad. I mean, you're basically what's the problem with all things is that you just don't have enough manpower, funding, whatever, understanding.
Well, that's
you know.
that's the part why it's garbage, is because it does have enough funding.
Oh, I worked in the field. I wholly disagree.
Well, so most people's problems are very, very easy to fix. Like, many people are starving to death. So what do? Give them food. Do we have enough money to give food vouchers to people? Could doctors like write prescriptions for food? Like,
Oh,
yeah, they
You're
could.
talking about general problems. I was talking about psych problems. But
Well, yeah,
yeah,
most of the psych problems are caused by general problems. So if you fix their life
general
problems, which are
problems.
usually pretty easy, more or less, yeah, you could do it. So like housing problems, most people are major depressed and homeless and have psychological issues because they don't have housing. That really screws up your brain. So how do you fix them? Make cheap housing. Stop putting like legal limitations on where you can build housing. And
Aren't there plenty of depressed rich people?
yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
there's
all sorts of things. But
they're fine. They don't really count. Who cares? And most of them,
They have
most
an
of that can be.
incorrigible belief that they're
They're
depressed.
depressed for other reasons, obviously.
I mean, this gets into like the value of mental health and like the effective value and stuff. But no, I was just interested because I was like, well, we use psychology for pretty much everything, like marketing, economics, all this stuff.
Ah, yes, there's
Um,
another good reason. So psychology is used more to manipulate people into spending money than to help them. Another reason psychology is garbage.
Well, I mean, if you're looking at it from a moral perspective, like it manipulates people, yeah, I guess. But it's also like, what do people want? How do you meet that need, kind of thing. It's not like forcing people to buy stuff. I mean, you could use it that way too, but
I mean, that's literally what advertising is. Advertising is literally using people's brain to manipulate them into buying stuff.
Well, yeah, but you also want to find the product. So you have to like have the product that they want. I mean, you can
Well,
manipulate them
none of
all
that's
you want.
psychology. That's all engineering. So you have a product you think is cool. You build the product, and they're like, all right, time to do some advertising. Let's go do some psychology. Psychology has nothing to do with building the product.
How do I put this? It's finding the product that people would want.
That doesn't happen. So most people build products by doing research and development. They don't do psychology. They do research and development. They build stuff. And they're like, here's the thing I'm missing that I need. And it would be cool if somebody built it. Nobody built it. I'm going to build it and sell it. So there's not like the point of focus groups isn't to be like, oh, well, they really like, let's just find out anything they could possibly like. It's more like they've already built a bunch of stuff and they're trying it to try and see what fits.
Right.
It's not like they just do focus groups. What should we build, focus group? Just give me an idea of anything. Like, no. It's not like psychology is not really a big factor in that.
So the end method is just that it's bad because it's efficient, but it's not efficient enough.
Well, no, it's bad
Something
because
like-
it's used to manipulate people primarily, and it's used to help people very minimally, and it's very bad at helping people and very good at manipulating people. So it's like, why are guns bad? Because they kill very easily and they don't help very easily.
So I take it you're not a fan of Sam Harris then?
Well, I'm definitely a fan of Sam Harris. Why would that matter?
Well, because he's all about psychology.
So?
Well, okay, do you understand what he says about psychology?
Yes. I mean, I don't agree with him. Being a fan doesn't mean you have to agree with him.
Oh, okay. I'm not saying like, I mean, a fan of his work, obviously. I'm not saying like a fan of Sam Harris. Like, he's a pretty good guy. I'm just,
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm a fan of some of his ideas, especially his arguments on free will, but I don't, like, the fact that you can be a fan of somebody doesn't mean you have to agree with them on everything.
So, would you say
Quantum, do you agree with me on everything?
Well, God, Quantum doesn't agree with me. So.
Yeah, I totally do. No.
Yep.
No, I was trying to make the
A lot of
discussion of I think you could better the world through psychology and understanding people and their problems more.
Well, I would say we could better the world by bettering psychology, but modern
Yeah,
psychology is garbage.
Well, I mean, yeah, all things can be garbage if they're not as efficient as they need to be. Like,
Well, Shu V, do you know how bad the replication crisis is in that field?
I couldn't even speak to it.
It's something like 30%. So, or somewhere around.
No,
there. So
that's
that
the
means
hard sciences. The hard sciences have 30%. The soft sciences are like 90% unreproducible.
Oh, I was saying 30% reproducible. Like
Yeah,
30% of their studies can be reproduced.
In the soft sciences, it's more like 10% are reproducible.
Okay, so anyway, somewhere in the low percentages, and so that just means that all the theories that they're coming up with that you're saying are quote unquote good, they're not anything that can be reproduced across most people, which means they're not even really theories.
Oh, you're talking about from like the empirical basis stuff, yeah.
No, just anything that you're going to come up with.
Academic philosophy. Academic philosophy is what you're talking about.
Yeah, and just like as a psychological theory, and then however that cashes out in terms of the normative sense where people are in therapy or however they're applying these things, they're not producing the results. That's why someone can say that psychology is garbage as a field.
So yeah, just questions asked. Am I talking about clinical psychology or social psychology? Both.
Yeah.
Both.
Well, yeah. See, I disagree on the clinical part, but whatever.
I'm gonna dip out really quick, but I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I don't know who wants to man the stage now, but it can be any of you guys.
What happened to?
Well, it'll just be automatic, right? It'll just automatically switch to whoever. Fine.
Yeah, it'll be whoever leaves last can like close it out. But yeah, it's been good talking.
Yep, thanks for hosting. Appreciate it. Looking forward to the one on
no
December 6th at 6 p.m. with Dr. Graham Oppie.
Hell yeah. It's going to be awesome. All right.
Insert those shameless plugs.
All right. Bye, guys.
See ya.
TJump, you were using the word incorrigibility in like a different way than I understand it. My understanding of incorrigibility is it's something that someone can't be talked out of, like an idea they can't give up.
I don't think so. Like, that's not the way I use it.
I'm pretty sure that's. Let me check the SEP, but I'm pretty sure that's the definition.
Incorrigibility is a property of a philosophical position which implies that it is necessarily true simply by virtue of being believed.
Well, I'm looking here at the SEP entry on certainty, where they discuss incorrigibility as property of a belief being such that the subject is incapable of giving it up.
The social definitions. Anyways.
I always thought it had much more to do with the subject and not necessarily some truth value, but just that, like sort of like your position on you existing. It's not something you're capable of giving up.
Yeah, I go with the other definition, the one that's incapable of being wrong. So that's like, I think, the same definition.
What entry is that on?
I don't know.
Oh.
Find it.
So, okay, I'll talk about stuff if anyone else wants to talk about stuff. So clinical stuff, what's the issue with that you have? Not like in a clinical practice sense, not in a research sense.
What's my problem with clinical, but not in a clinical sense? I'm not sure what you're asking.
Like not in the research sense, like the practice, doctors, therapists, that sort of things.
The same thing. It's they don't treat people. They try to manipulate people into changing their psychological positions without actually doing anything to help them with their lives. Like the whole point of therapy is to
what do you could do?
Lots of stuff. Like so the purpose of philosophy is to correct incorrect beliefs that people have, like analyzing their past and finding patterned beliefs that they have. Like, oh, well, these are wrong, and if we change these, it'll fix your life problem. When really that's not the case. Really, the cause of most life problems is your life. You got to fix their life. Give them food, give them houses, give them an income, give them education, give them sex. Like sex therapy, that's a huge, awesome thing I'm totally for in renovation in psychology, modern psychology. That's an awesome thing. So like the principle, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for life. Like you got to start by giving them a fish. Like a person who's starving to death, you're not going to be able to teach him to fish. First, you got to give him a fish. And that's the part psychology is missing. You got to give people enough of what they're missing and then teach them how to cope with it, not the other way around. And without doing that, it's just garbage.
Do you think those things are a panacea, like all those habitability and such things you mentioned?
I'm not sure what you mean. So like each individual is going to have different problems, and identifying those problems and then giving the person what they need is what psychology is missing.
I think that's kind of naive, but as well, I mean, let's say a person has a problem, you can't just give them something.
Sure you can. Like sex works fine. Prostitution is a thing.
Yeah, okay.
Food works fine. Housing works fine. Like most of them do work. Like most of the problems most people have are very easy solutions.
I mean, are you talking about like general problems? Like, I mean, yeah, sure. If a homeless person doesn't have a home, okay. But I mean,
yes, most psychological issues are from emotional or things you're missing in life. They're not psychological. The psychological part is just
you're not talking about like bipolar or schizophrenia or anything like that. You're just talking about like basic psychological needs. Like
yes, the things that affect most people. Yes, the big part of what psychology does. The vast majority of what psychology does.
Okay, sorry. I thought you were talking about
yeah, there definitely there's like actual conditions where you need drugs and stuff. Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
that is a thing.
That's what I was getting at. I was like, I don't get it. Like you're talking about like psychology is like terrible, and I get that, but I don't get. I'm like, give them food, like that's not going to help a depressive person or something,
Yeah,
like
it does.
I guess, but
Definitely
well, I
does.
mean,
That's one of the main reasons for depression is malnutrition.
yeah, that and other things, but yeah.
Most of the causes of depression have to do with life insufficiencies, not psychological states.
The general population, I guess. We're not talking about like
The vast
people in,
majority
like,
of people who have
psychiatric or
depression
yeah.
have depression because they're missing something in their life, not because they're just psychologically thinking about things wrong. The psychologically thinking about things wrong is a stupid idea. Obviously,
Well,
people have like mental
yeah.
conditions that are just bipolar or whatever,
Yeah,
but
I'm
that's
talking about
not
the mental stuff.
that's a minority. That's a severe minority. That's not the majority. The majority do not have anything wrong with their brain. They just
So you're
have
just
something wrong
talking
with their
about
life.
societal health.
I'm just talking about the 99% of vast majority of everything psychology is supposed to do and doesn't do shit about. Like pretty much
Okay.
everything it's supposed to be doing that it doesn't do.
So when you say they don't do stuff, are you talking about just the research, the societal
Fixing
research
people's
that's
lives
supposed
part.
to-
Like they don't actually take an active role in trying to help improve people's lives. They just talk to them and waste their time. When what
So
they
you're not
need
talking about
is
like
help fixing their life.
doctors or psychiatrists or
Yeah,
something like that. You're talking
psychiatrists,
about
psychologists, those people who don't do shit to actually help people's lives.
so okay, so what I'm trying to get at here is that you're like, oh well, people have mental conditions, that's a different thing.
That's a minority.
And
So the minority of people who actually have mental conditions and just need drugs, that's fine. The majority of people, the vast majority of people who psychology is supposed to be helping, does not do shit to help.
TJump, what do you say to those studies they do of the third world where the reported happiness, despite having like abject poverty by comparison to the first world, is it's like a higher reported happiness?
It's not what just their subjective inclinations of what they think happiness is different.
Yeah.
But actually, when you
Well,
measure it
but
like the World Happiness Index, it's not. Wealth is one of the biggest factors in happiness on pretty much every psychological study. Wealth up to, I think, there's many studies done on wealth and happiness, and wealth up to about like $50,000 or whatever you need
Yeah,
to meet your basic
diminishing.
needs. Yeah, but so it does. Wealth is a huge impact up to when you get your needs met. Then the measurement for happiness in those cultures changes from being I have food, therefore I'm happy, to I have value, and it's harder to find value. So the definitions of happiness is different in those cultures, which is why you get a difference in, difference in the polling data. But the polling data isn't really a very rigorous metric. The rigorous metric is more like the happiness metrics that actually measure the relevant data. The polls are not as much so.
So if a person comes in to a psychiatrist and they say, I'm depressed, they have a history of depression, the psychiatrist is supposed to do what?
What are you missing in life? Okay, let's go get that. Poof, depression
Okay, well,
gone.
What are you missing in life? How are you like? I'm just saying the method upon which they are supposed to rectify the situation seems almost impossible for a system.
What
Like,
it's literally what I did for my depression. So I don't know what you're even talking about.
The psychiatrist said, "What are you missing?" And then they
No,
got
I had to do it myself because the psychologists were dumb as shit and never did anything to help.
right. So let's say you go
Like
to
this is
like I'm
this
trying
isn't
to
even
say like
hard. Like someone's depressed, you talk to them. Okay, what are you missing? What do you need in life to be happy? Okay, let's go get it for you. Here are the resources. I will do the research for you. I will find the best resources, the opportunities to get them. I'll give you a plan to how to do this. Here's how you actualize that plan. I will give you a guided step in life to do these things, to get to that goal. Not just tell you about your bullshit psychological state. I don't care.
Did you see
it sounds like they
a
need to
psychotherapist?
just know what
I saw everything.
Okay, because if you're talking about like CBT and of
Yep,
course
I took
you-
CBT, I took IBT, I took DBT. I did all those things.
I mean, you
Garbage.
just described literally what CBT aims to do. You change.
No,
you don't change the behavior, but you change.
CBT is only about changing behavior.
Well, yeah, it's
Well,
that's
so
true.
most psychologists don't adhere to singular discipline. They're mostly eclectic, so they would use CBT, and then they would kind of create a schedule for you that would work for what your issues are. That's what they should be doing.
Nope.
Well,
So
I
so
just
like
think
so
it's
the goal
weird
here
to
was is
find out.
what they needed to do is here is a website where you can find the women you need. That's what they should have said. Stage 1. Here is a website where you can find the women you need. That would have been the solution. It took 5 seconds rather than 5 years of therapy. So the goal is to actually do the research, find what the person needs. Do you need a job that pays this much? Do you need this kind of connections? It's actually to go into the world and find the things they're missing and bring them those things. Not
So
tell
what if
them
they
where to
don't
get them.
know?
Bring them the things. Bring them the things in the world they're missing. The connections, the opportunity, the relationships, whatever. That's the part that's missing. Now, just sitting back in a chair and telling them where to go look, that part isn't helpful. It's you need to go out into the world and get them what they need and bring it to them part. That's the part that they need to add.
Just seems
Which is completely
Yeah.
realistic. It's completely doable. It's very, very easy to do. Many people do it all over the world. The new thing in psychology, the sex therapy thing does it. Most people in the world do this in communities. Churches do this. This is completely realistic. There's absolutely nothing unrealistic about it.
I just think for patient load it wouldn't be realistic, but
It's perfectly, that's such a stupid thing to say. It's literally realistic. This is literally what most people in the world do. They say, I'm missing this in life. And their friends are like, okay, how can I help you get it? Their family does that. The churches do that. Literally, this is what people do who are normal human beings. Therapists are just dumbasses.
I just don't think most people will be like, I'm missing this. I don't think that's a mentality.
That's like what everyone does. That's literally what most people do. Like,
I think if you talk to a lot of therapists, they'll even tell you that,
I've talked
the
to a lot of
effectiveness
therapists.
well, the effectiveness of therapy is not so much different by taking one of these different methods or even just talking to a friend.
Yeah.
A lot of it
Right.
is in the didactic method, right?
Which is
They
not
don't
helpful. That's the
pretend.
problem. The method is the garbage part. People need to add something in their life. Therapists need to go into the world, find the thing that they're missing, and get it to them. Now, finding out what that is can maybe have a conversation, but the part missing is the therapist needs to get off of their ass, go into the world, find the thing the person is missing, and get it to them. That's the part that's missing. And the therapist never ever gets off their ass. They're legally bound to not do that. It's illegal for a therapist to get off their ass and actually do something.
I feel like this is the I don't know, my experiences are in psych clinics and stuff, so the method of going out and doing something or finding what they're meaning, it for me, my experience is like people are actually damaged and stuff, so
That's wrong.
People are what?
Damage. That's
Like-
one of that's one of the myths from like it's one of the pervasive myths in psychology that is like a conservative myth that just hasn't died. It's that, if we actually do
Well,
the
not
work
like-
for them, then they're going to suffer. They're not going to learn what they need to learn. It's just a conservative myth that's wrong.
well, it's you can't fix the problem kind of thing.
Right, it's a
There's-
conservative myth
there's-
that's wrong. Like if someone's starving to death, teaching them how to
It's
fish is a
not
waste of
that.
time. First you give them a fish.
It's
This is literally what it
can't
is. I've been
fix
through
their
this.
life.
No, again, oh my God, listen to the words I'm saying. I just addressed this when you interrupted and said it's not this. If someone is starving to death, you can't
You
teach
keep
them to
using
stop talking. Stop talking. If someone is starving to death, don't teach them to fish. You're a dumbass if you try to teach them to fish, and that's all therapists are doing. First thing, give them a fish. Give them enough food. Give them enough recognition of the success that they can have, and then teach them how to get it on their own. Don't just give it to them indefinitely. Give it to them enough first, and then teach them how to get it and then wean them off of it. That is the correct way to do it. Therapists don't do the most important step, which is giving them the fish in the first place.
Okay. I mean, the fish analogy I get, but I don't think it's quite so simple. I mean, you keep talking kind of general.
Like what would that not apply to? It would apply to social situations, relationships, family, friends, meaningful work
Well,
situations. It would apply to literally.
I'm
What does it
trying-
not apply to?
What I'm trying to tell you is that certain people go through things in life that are very harsh.
Yeah.
And then they have psychological.
Is that the majority? Because I've literally mentioned this. What is the majority of human beings who see therapists need?
What do they need?
Yeah. Why? What do they need to help? Why do they go to a therapist? Because they're missing something. They're trying to find what it is.
mean, That's like
There are
very,
obviously
very
lots of people who have really severe past PTSD and whatever, and they need a very specific kind of help. Most people do not fall into that category. Most people are not helped by therapy other than just having somebody to talk to.
Oh, so you're just doing like
Like I've said like a million times, the 99.999% of everyone who actually needs help from psychology, not the 1% who have really serious debilitating needs that need drugs. Obviously, giving them drugs is perfectly fine.
Oh, okay. So this is, I mean, this is what I was talking about. I was like, oh, I was talking kind of like realistic scenarios instead of just the kind of like the soft therapy of like, oh, I feel depressed a little bit or stuff like that. So.
Well, the soft
Alright.
therapy is the thing where they do need usually help getting something in life, not drugs. Drugs does not help in that situation. Drugs helps
Well-
when you're like severely depressed and you're like going to kill yourself tomorrow. Then drugs are great. Drugs are great for that.
Yeah, so I was sorry. I guess I misunderstood here. I was talking about the serious cases, not the I feeling down or
Yeah, but yeah, I mean I agree. The serious cases can do. There's definitely drugs are a very easy solution for that, obviously, but it's the ones that the majority of cases are the hard part.